Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about Claudio Abbado's Verdi Opera Box. Now, we already talked about the Verdi Rossini. What am I talking about? We already talked about Claudio Abbado's Rossini Opera Box, which is fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. One of the best things he ever did. Well, the Verdi box on Deutsche Grammophon is not quite as good. When it's good, it's amazing. Absolutely great. But when it isn't, it really sucks. And it's just a shame that the same conductor can be so fabulous in some aspects of it and so miserable in others. A lot of it has to do with casting. There are 6 operas in here. And, it's actually interesting. DG left out his 2 recordings of the Requiem. One of them at La Scala, which was about the worst recording of the Requiem ever in the history of humankind. And the other was in Vienna, and it's pretty good. And that one would have been worth including. That La Scala Verdi Requiem seems to have disappeared, like poof! Like everybody said, oh, what Requiem? Nobody wants to remember it. It apparently existed because of a defunct opera project. So instead of a bad opera project, they did a bad Requiem. Anyway, let's forget about that and talk about the operas. Are you ready? You get Aida, and Ballo and Maschera, Don Carlos. Don Carlos is the original 5-act French version, sung sort of in French. Let's see, Falstaff, Macbeth, and Simon Boccanegra. All of these performances are done with La Scala forces, except for the Berlin Philharmonic in Falstaff. Yes, okay, that's good enough. But they are, and it's interesting the way they line up here. See the way they do this? It's crappy performances here on the left, or your left. This is my right, but it's probably your left, and really good ones on the other side. So let's deal with the garbage first and the great stuff second, so we can end on an up note. Okay? First, Aida. Oh my God. What a horrible Aida this was. It is soft and flabby and boring, and the singing is like, oh, well, let's put it this way. You've got Katia Ricciarelli as Aida. Now, Ricciarelli is the weak link among the women in all of the bad performances. Plain and simple. She had this light lyric voice, and she took on these heavy roles. I mean, it's the same old story, right? We see it over and over and over and over. And I don't understand how these sort of, ever since Toscanini got Hervanelli to do all this stuff, there's this history of sort of egomaniacal conductors ruining singers. Maybe they were sleeping with them. Maybe they wanted to. I don't know. But, this is all about great singing. That's what opera is. These are not conductors' operas, more or less, or they shouldn't be. Not that the conductor can't do wonderful things. The conductor can and should, as far as I'm concerned, but not at the expense of the singers. And, Ricciarelli, she was brave and she was plucky, but she just didn't have enough voice for these roles. She certainly didn't have enough voice for Aida. And then you have Amneris, who's Elena Obraztsova. Now, Obraztsova, she was one of those sort of wobbly Russian Slavic, we used to call those singers Slavonska Wobbleskaya because, they had those heavy, kind of watery sounding voices. And Obraztsova was the locus classicus for a Slavic contralto who wobbled her way through whatever she sang. You don't want to hear her as Amneris. The rest of Domingo is Domingo. As Radames, he's fine. He only recorded it 450 times, and he sounds the same every time. He was sort of a marvel. And let's see, who else? Oh, yeah, this is the one. And Leon Nucci as Amonasro. Nucci had sort of this dryish, leathery voice. He's not really right he's another one who's kind of a disappointment. He's kind of the disappointment among the men in these roles, because you need a certain bigness of tone, and just a warm, not dry and hollow quality to the vocalism. And Nucci was really not one for that. So the Aida, and then there's Abbado. What was he thinking? I mean, there's even one thing I remember vividly in the triumphal scene. It's da 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 ba da don't bang da. Well, he doesn't have the bangs because, it was a convention of Italian opera in those days that composers wrote for bass drum and cymbals to be played together, and they simply called it gran cassa, bass drum. And it was up to you, the performer, where you decided to add cymbals and where you didn't. And, it's not as if there's a question. So Verdi just writes gran cassa. It's the convention, and sometimes you want the bass drum alone. And usually when that happens, Verdi will write gran cassa sola, like alone, get it? Or senza piatti, but usually it's gran cassa sola, meaning just leave the cymbals out of it. There is no excuse in a triumphal scene not to have the cymbal part there. I mean, it's triumphal, right? I mean, cymbals are like triumph. I mean, ever since like Psalm 150, what is it? Praise God with cymbals. I mean, that's triumph. All the way to biblical times, you use the cymbals. Well, Abbado didn't. I was shocked. It's a false literalism. And, one way to figure out, how false the literalism is to listen to early recordings of Aida by people who, played it under Verdi, and they're all using the cymbal parts. I mean, it's not a question of this stuff. And there are some conventions, as they say, all's not false that's taught in the public schools. Sometimes the tradition is the right thing to do. Anyway, it's a performance that always errs on the side of being tired, inexpressive, and weak. So that's it for Aida. Next, Un Ballo and Maschera. Again, this is not a bad performance. It really isn't. Except, let me see, who have we got here? Not Abruzzo and Domingo. Oh, yeah. Except, sorry, we have the same issues that we had in Aida with the women. You've got Ricciarelli as Amelia, and if there's any part she should never have sung, it's Amelia. Well, she should never have sung Turandot under Carillon either. That was a similar mistake, because Amelia is the one Verdi role that's really written for a dramatic soprano voice. It's a heavy role. I mean, Birgit Nilsson did Amelia. That was her one great Verdi role, along with Aida. But even more so, Amelia in Un Ballo. That's the kind of voice you want to hear. Leontine Price was a great Amelia, but to have Ricciarelli attempting Amelia is a mistake. And we have Abratsova again as Ulrika. Now, fortunately, Ulrika is only in one scene. She does her hocus pocus fortune-telling business, the gypsy sitting out on Boston Common, and then she's out of the picture. But again, it's just not strongly cast. Abbado himself is okay. He really is okay, but not. All right. Then we come to Don Carlo, or Don Carlos. Don Carlos, in the original French version by a cast that doesn't really sing very good French. That was always a big deal when this came out. I don't really care if their French sucks. Most people's French sucks. Most French people's French sucks. So it's not such a big deal. The problem is, first of all, technical. This was an early DG digital recording. It was recorded in very glassy, somewhat congested sound, like in the big, crowd scenes of the Auto da Fe scene, for example. Now, we do have Nikolai Gyarov as his typically fine Grand Inquisitor. That's a good thing. And Rogero Raimondi as Philip II. Those are good. And, the scenes with the men, the major characters there are really, really important. Domingo, of course, is Domingo. And he was sort of the Don Carlo of the 20th century. So he's fine. And Ricciarelli is, it's just a mistake. It's just a mistake. But you do have Valentini Tirani as Elizabeth. That's good. That's pretty good news. She's okay. And it's not a bad Don Carlo. It really isn't. But I do think there are better ones. I mean, we know what the great Don Carlos are. I mean, we really do. I mean, there's like Schulte with Tibaldi. There's Giolini, on EMI, and the Carillon. Those Carillon. There are two Carillons. There's a live Orfeo that's very, very good, really hot, and I think it's a Salzburg Festival production. And then there's the official EMI recording. They're both great. That's the 4-act version. The other two are the 5-act versions in Italian. You pick them and choose them, and decide which one you want. But this one was exciting because it was the first full-scale, full-fledged French version. There are 700 alternatives for the closing scene. Verdi was never sure exactly how it should end, or if it ever ends. We don't know what happens to Don Carlo, but it's just a little disappointing. It really is in the casting, and that's the thing. I mean, I'm not as interested. I'm not a musicologist. When I listen to operas, I want to hear great singing. It's the only thing I want to hear. Opera without great singing is intolerable. I don't care how lovely the edition is, or how musicologically accurate it is, or what language they think they're singing in. I just want to hear great singing. Period. And this doesn't have it in some critical roles. Okay, now let's get to the good stuff. This is the really good stuff, and actually it's in order of wonderfulosity. I mean, in order of wonderfulness. I mean, look at this. They've just listed them perfectly. Okay, Falstaff. This Falstaff is terrific. It's a great Falstaff. First of all, Bryn Terfel is one of the greatest Falstaffs that ever did Falstaff. He's absolutely fabulous. You've got the Berlin Philharmonic with Abbado, but more to the point, this is a Verdi score that was ideal for late Abbado because it's his most Mendelssohnian / Rossinian score in terms of its lightness, its elegance. It's absolutely the kind of piece that Abbado can really sink his teeth into because, as I've always said, he was a bit of a fuss budget and a micromanager, and he's really, really good with music that requires lots of details in terms of lightness, articulation, little subtleties of rhythm and balance. Falstaff is one of those pieces. It really is. And Abbado just seems to be loving it. He kind of got rather sad and miserable in his later years, not because he was ill, just because that's the kind of interpreter he was. He sort of withdrew into himself, and the result was not always musically happy, but Falstaff is one of the great recordings of his later years, and it's delicious. I mean, the strong cast. Is there anybody here we don't care about? No, they're all great. They're all fine. And, oh my God, you get Dorothea Rushman. Yeah, sure. That's great stuff. Absolutely great stuff. Next, Macbeth. One of the two great Macbeths. The others being, well, there are three. You might want to have, Leinsdorf with, I think, who's it? Leonie Rieseneck as Lady Macbeth, which is fabulous. But, you've got basically Muti on the one hand and Abbado on the other. And it's 6 in one, a half dozen in the other. They're both great. You really have to hear both of them. And I mean, Moody has the best witches you've ever heard in your life. But, it's so exciting. All of that supposedly trashy music that he just goes crazy on, and it's fabulous. But this is just a great, great, great Macbeth. You've got Shirley Verrett as Lady Macbeth, and Piero Capuccilli and Placido Domingo and Nikolai Kiyarov and What's Not to Love. It's just terrific. And it was these performances, really these performances, that taught us just how great these early / middle Verdi operas really are. I mean, how exciting, how dramatic, how full of terrific music. And Macbeth, of course, was revised. We only played today the revised version, basically, and it's just superb. It's a superb piece. I've seen it a bunch of times, and it always works. Even that crazy Met production that everybody shat on because they hated the staging, But I saw it with Renato Scotto at the Met. Oh my God, was she a great Lady Macbeth. She did a mad scene. Well, first of all, she floated a high something or other at the end of it, like a D or one of those notes up there, that was incredible. And she was an amazing singing actress, and she was a tiny, tiny lady, and she was all alone on this vast stage, scratching her hand a lot, doing her grand scena sonambulissima, whatever it's called. And she was incredible. But, the whole opera is. And then I saw it again, I don't know, a decade or two ago. I can't even remember. At Savonlinna in Finland, at the Savonlinna Festival, where they did a very, very good production, an excellent production. They did a bunch of Verdi operas that season, including Rigoletto and a few others, and they did Macbeth. And boy, is that a good opera. It just works fabulously. And, I loved it. I just loved it. And the Abbado recording with La Scala Forces really set a new standard. And Shirley Verrett is terrific. This was one of her greatest recordings, too, as Lady Macbeth. So, the Macbeth is amazing. However, Abbado's greatest Verdi recording, and one of the greatest Verdi recordings of all times, is the SimoneBoccanegra. Because, first of all, did you ever hear the prelude to SimoneBoccanegra? SimoneBoccanegra, actually, isn't it? It's now Simon. There's no E. SimoneBoccanegra. First of all, the prelude, play the prelude for your friends and ask them who the composer is. It's a great guess the composer piece because it sounds like Brahms. It's incredible. You would never think it's Verdi. It's ya da 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 ba da 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 da. Oh, it's so beautiful. And the thing about Boccanegra is that the plot is so convoluted. There's this prelude. It's like takes place 20 years before the rest of the opera, and nobody knows how everyone's related to everybody else, and they're all under assumed names, and it's all about political intrigue anyway. So it's all full of. I can't even begin to describe what happens in Simon Boccanegra, and it doesn't matter. It's one of those operas, you can just sit and listen to it. You don't even have to pay attention to the words. It is beautiful. And in the council chamber scene in the revised version, which is, again, the only one we play nowadays, it's one of the greatest, 20, 25 minutes of music that Verdi ever wrote. And it has a tam-tam, which adds immeasurably to its attractions. But boy, this SimoneBoccanegra, it is the greatest recording Abbado ever made. It is the greatest recording of the work. It is one of the handful of incalculably great 20th century Verdi recordings. It was stunningly played and recorded. And, more to the point, the cast is absolutely wonderful. It's Mirella Freni, who's wonderful, and Jose Carreras, and Nicky Guerrov, and Jose Van Dam, and Piero Capuccilli. It's just, there's not a weak link anywhere. It's an incredible performance, absolutely incredible. It put the work on the map. It really did. It made all the subsequent performances and recordings possible, and none of them were as good. There were a bunch that came later, and none of them were as good. So, I'm. How do you summarize a box that basically is batting 500? In baseball, that's great. In opera, that's not so great. You've got 3 absolutely sensational, fantastic performances, and 3, meh, only the Aida, I think, is really terrible. The Ballo is mediocre. The Don Carlo is sort of good, but it's just off compared to the alternatives. And you really only want it if you have to have that original French version. The whole 5-act thing in French. I don't know. I don't know. Like I said, I go for the singers. There is just no point in listening to an opera if you don't have great singers. And that's my feeling about it. There are exceptions. I make exceptions, for example, for Toscanini's, Verdi and Puccini recordings only because he was there. And I think that it's a connection to the composer that, I think is historically interesting. But are they my favorite opera recordings? well, not all the, well, his Falstaff, yes, is great. I mean, there are some good ones, but there are some times when a conductor can be so compelling. And this is even true in Wagner. It's the great myth that Wagner operas could be carried along by the conductor. That's also bull. It never works. If the singing isn't there, it's awful. That's why Karajan's Ring has always been controversial, because, Karajan is Karajan. The conducting is amazing, but does he always have the right cast? The best singers? Well, no, he doesn't. And that compromised his Ring in perpetuity. And so it is with Abbado's Verdi. However much you love the conductor, you gotta have the singers. I can't say it often enough, but I'm going to stop saying it now. So here's your choice. Get the operas separately, the good ones, Falstaff, Macbeth, and Boccanegra, or you can get this box. It's very inexpensive. You'll have the other ones. You don't have to play them. It doesn't take up a lot of space. It's your call. Keep on listening, folks. Thank you. Take care.